Warning, this episode may contain disturbing content, soothing narration, and mild existential dread. Basically, murder ASMR for stressed professionals. Listener discretion is advised. Hell, it might be necessary.
The state of Texas has granted Robert Roberson a stay of execution. They granted it just 7 days before he was scheduled to die. A mercy that was not granted to Cameron Todd Willingham, though both men were convicted and sentenced to death based on science long since disproven or discredited. Roberson, accused of killing his toddler daughter by shaking her, has now received his third stay of execution. The courts will again decide whether or not the new evidence that undermines the very foundation of his conviction, is enough to grant him a new trial. But in 2004, experts begged Texas to do the same for Cameron Todd Willingham. They pleaded for time to prevent an irreversible sentence before the new science could be fully evaluated, and the state refused. Prosecutors insisted the conviction stood on the whole of the evidence, and the court denied Willingham even the most basic humanitarian grace, the chance to ensure that they got it right before ending his life. Willingham maintained his innocence until the day he died, and the science, it turns out, agrees with him. But the decision to carry out his sentence wasn't based on logic or reason or mercy. It was based on politics, dirty, messy, self-preserving politics. And maybe corruption sounds like a heavy accusation, but what else do you call a system that rejects truth simply because it's afraid to face its own mistakes? Cameron Todd Willingham paid for the sins of a corrupted and flawed justice system, and in the wake of his death, the political circus only escalated. Mounting public outrage put Texas Governor Rick Perry squarely in the hot seat, a place he apparently found so uncomfortable that he played political chess to keep himself and the justice system in his state from ever having to admit their mistake. But public pressure has a way of building, slowly, inevitably, until something has to change. And Willingham's death did precipitate change. Last week we covered the science, the myths disguised as expertise that led to his conviction. Those errors likely weren't malicious, just the result of investigators taught to believe what was essentially fire interpretation folklore, passed down like some sort of scientific wizardry. But what's harder to frame as an innocent mistake are the political games that followed, the posturing, the deliberate obfuscation, the smear campaigns that robbed Willingham of truth even after his death. Politics is dirty, but it's never so dirty as when an elected official facing re-election has to save face over a deadly mistake. And Rick Perry, well, he fully embraced that game. Now, 20 years later, the rules still don't favor the innocent, and they nearly claimed another casualty. Because Robert Roberson's fight isn't over, he's still battling for a new trial, still fighting to have his case heard without the ghost of junk science haunting the courtroom. I can't tell you with certainty that Roberson is innocent, but if we're looking strictly at the science, the evidence points strongly toward that, if not overwhelmingly so. And one thing I can say with confidence is this. Unless a jury hears his case again, free of discredited science and bias, Robert Roberson will never have justice, and the state of Texas will spill more blood in the name of corrupted justice. This is part 2, the conclusion of Texas justice on Crime to Burn. Welcome to Crime to Burn, where we explore the dark city landscape where true crime intersects with arson and criminal negligence. Join us as we sift through the ashes to bring you the story of what really happened. Welcome back to Crime to Burn. I'm April, a fire protection engineer, former firefighter, and crusader for real justice.
And I'm the hamburger that cannot be helped.
Friends, we are desperate for your help getting this little indie podcast noticed by the big boys over on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. If you could please do us a solid and leave a 5-star review, that would mean the world. We haven't had a new Apple review since August, and our audience has grown over 700% since this spring. So go do the thing. Leave us 5 stars and earn yourself the eternal gratitude of this small but mighty indie podcast team. It's 2 of us.
Chads.
Chad's a mannequin and a skeleton. We have 2 Chads.
Those are helpful.
It's also incredibly helpful to find us on TikTok, X, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube and interact with the content we post. Likes, comments, and shares all help us get in front of more eyeballs so we can recruit more ear holes. If you're tired of ads, your salvation is at hand. Head on over to our Patreon and claim your seat at the sacred snack table by joining the Cult of Steve. Be like Laura Pisciota. I really hope I pronounced that right. She is our newest Patreon member. Welcome, Laura, to the Inner Sanctum, the highest order of the Cult of Steve, where we greet you with snacks, absurdity, and the gift of Steve's eternal stickiness in the form of stickers, which we'll all be shipping out in just the next couple of weeks. If you're not quite ready to join, you can still wear the cool kid clothes by checking out our spread shop. The link is in the show notes. And of course, you'll always have access to Crime to Burn on your favorite podcast platforms. You just won't get the extra absurdity of our bonus content. Finally, you can send your case suggestions, fire stories, or unhinged admiration to crimetoburn@gmail.com. This is the conclusion of our series on Texas justice, a series born out of righteous outrage that the state of Texas was about to execute a man named Robert Roberson, convicted by a jury that heard quote-unquote experts testify that science proved he'd killed his daughter by shaking her. But since his conviction and sentencing, that science, which was the very foundation of the prosecution's case, has been largely discredited. Like the idea that lightning never strikes the same place twice. It sounds scientific, but it's just not true. And like those double lightning strikes, Texas has walked this same dark and shady path before. In 1991, a fatal house fire claimed the lives of 3 young daughters of Cameron Todd Willingham. Investigators, relying on techniques that were little more than folklore and wives' tales, walked into a courtroom and presented their interpretations of that fire as fact. As a result, Cameron Todd Willingham was found guilty of murdering his children and sentenced to die. But before Texas executed him, the science evolved. The theories were tested, challenged, and ultimately debunked. The evidence used to convict him was revealed to be junk science, nothing more than myth dressed up as expertise. Real experts rushed in to appeal for Todd's life, sending their findings all the way to the governor's office. That governor was Rick Perry. Now, Rick Perry was the governor of Texas from 2000 to 2015, and he practically built his political persona out of a tough-on-crime cliché. Perry wasn't just an outspoken proponent of the death penalty. He criticized anyone who opposed capital punishment as being soft on crime. He pushed for mandatory sentencing and drug crackdowns, inviting his constituents to see his hardline approach as the only thing standing between them and criminal chaos in the streets. He framed harsh criminal penalties as an extension of conservative Christian values, punishment for sinners and justice for the righteous. Ironically, based on his actions or lack thereof in the Willingham case, it seems he forgot that truth is also a basic tenet of Christianity. Under Perry's leadership, Texas carried out more executions than any other state in U.S. history, more than 250 in total. And one of those executions was that of Cameron Todd Willingham. It was just weeks before Cameron Todd Willingham's scheduled execution when his attorneys reached out to a man named Dr. Gerald Hurst. Now we've got to take a quick sidebar here, because honestly, this man was like if Clark Kent had been a chemist and fire expert with facial hair. Gerald Hurst was born June 16, 1937, and he was a chemist and explosives designer before he ever set foot in a courtroom. He invented unpack, a binary explosive made from 2 materials that aren't dangerous until they're mixed, which made them far safer to transport and handle. He also developed astrolite, another 2-part liquid explosive made from ammonium nitrate and hydrazine rocket fuel. It was twice as powerful as TNT, and at one time it held the title as the world's most powerful non-nuclear explosive. But Dr. Hurst wasn't all destruction and demolition. He also dabbled in delight. He contributed to the chemical compound used in liquid paper, or whiteout. And for those of you too young to remember, whiteout was what we used before the delete key was available, back before the widespread availability of word processors, from the times when we had to write most everything by hand. It was a white fluid you painted over your mistakes when you misspelled something on paper, a tiny bottle of redemption for bad handwriting. And because apparently the geniuses of controlled explosions have soft sides, Hurst also helped develop Mylar balloons. Yes, those shiny ones that float at kids' birthday parties. The same guy who invented some of the most powerful explosives on Earth also made birthday parties sparkle a little brighter for little kids. And he could have made other things brighter too, just in a very different way. Gerald Hurst also invented the exploding t-shirt, an innovation you definitely wouldn't find in the Sears catalog. I'm not sure what dress code calls for combustible casual wear, but as best I can tell, his Mylar balloons made it out to birthday parties, while the explosive shirts politely stayed in the lab.
What's the practical application for an exploding t-shirt?
You know, I looked for that and I couldn't find any couldn't find any use for
Hair
it.
removal? Rapid hair removal?
I don't know.
Like those male dancers? That would
Maybe.
be a fantastic way to enter the stage. Pow! Maybe some sequins. Oh, I can see the hair flying off and the glistening nipples.
All that to say, Gerald Hurst was a fire and explosion badass. And it's said that his Mylar balloon fortune gave him the freedom to work largely pro bono on arson cases. And Willingham's case wasn't his first rodeo when it came to calling out bad fire science. Hurst had already served as an expert witness in several other cases, testifying for defendants who'd been convicted on nothing more than folklore dressed up as forensics, long before the Willingham file ever landed on his desk. In fact, by the time Hurst learned of the Willingham case, he'd already secured 10 exonerations for people wrongfully convicted based on junk science. With the clock ticking down to Willingham's execution, Dr. Hurst stepped in, answering a desperate plea from the defense to take one last look at the evidence before Texas carried out an irreversible mistake. Hurst rushed to write up his findings, submitting his report to Governor Rick Perry's office within days of Cameron Todd Willingham's scheduled execution date. A desperate attempt to get a stay so that the courts could reconsider whether Willingham should be granted a new trial. But this wasn't the first attempt to save Willingham's life. Fire science in the field of fire investigation was still evolving. So when Willingham appealed his conviction to the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals in 1995, 3 years after his original trial, one of his claims challenged the significancy of the evidence. The court rejected it, citing that investigators' testimony about pour patterns and multiple points of origin served as sufficient proof of arson. Other challenges focused on the prosecution's use of gruesome photographs, images that his attorney argued inflamed the jury's emotions and weren't necessary to prove any element of the crime. The defense also alleged prosecutorial misconduct, claiming the state made improper statements about Willingham's lack of remorse and his personal character. And finally, they challenged the punishment phase of the trial, arguing that the psychiatrist who testified Willingham would be a future danger to society offered no real evidence.
They let a psychic on the stand?
Did I say psychic?
Well, he could tell the future.
Oh.
What is this dude? He does like medicine or he tells the future. What's his job?
We're going to talk about it a little more.
I'm
getting into him.
All right. Oh, I'm going to get into him too. With you. Let's both get in there together.
Arguing that the psychiatrist who testified Willingham would be a future danger to society offered no real evidence, and that quote-unquote future dangerousness alone was inadequate justification for the death penalty. 2 experts, and I'm using air quotes here, actually testified about Willingham's mental health. The first one was presented as an expert in the field of sociopathic behavior, but expert is a generous stretch. He had a master's degree in marriage and family issues. How that qualified him as an expert is a mystery to me, but he testified that Willingham's Iron Maiden poster, illustrating a fist punching through a skull, signified violence and death.
Eddie? They put Eddie on trial then.
And he also told the court that Willingham could potentially exhibit, and this is a quote, cultative or cultive type activities based on his possession of a Led Zeppelin poster of a fallen angel.
Well, no, that is clearly evil. Everyone knows that.
And shockingly, he was the second worst mental health expert to testify in the sentencing phase of Willingham's trial. The top spot for medical expert absurdity goes to psychiatrist James Grigson, because he was at least in title an actual doctor of psychiatry, which you'd think would set a higher bar than a marriage counselor. But Grigson told the court that Willingham was an incurable sociopath. And here's the shocking part. He made his diagnosis having never even met or interviewed Willingham. He diagnosed him purely based on the crimes he was accused of committing. In fact, that was pretty much Grigson's entire career, getting on the witness stand and calling defendants scary names. He testified in death penalty cases so often that he earned the nickname Dr. Death.
Was he an actual doctor? You say he didn't have a PhD.
No, the first guy didn't. The second guy, Grigson, he was a psychiatrist. He was a doctor of psychiatry.
Okay.
But Dr. Death was kind of Dr. Dumb, because not only is diagnosing someone you've never spoken to wildly unethical,
It's illegal.
he also claimed, with 100% certainty according to him, that Willingham would commit future acts of violence, and the only way to protect society was to keep him behind bars, or better yet, put him in a pine box.
What? That guy needed a restraining order.
And those two spectacular lapses in judgment didn't just cost Willingham his life, they also cost Grigson his career. He was expelled from both the American Psychiatric Association and the Texas Society of Psychiatric Physicians for unethical conduct. And personally, I think he got off way too easy. His testimony helped send Cameron Todd Willingham to his death, and the only consequence he faced was losing his career. A man lost his life because of this schmuck's ego masquerading as expertise, and somehow that was the lesser crime.
And I'm sure that was just a little cherry on top of a big sundae of bullshit.
Oh, I'd love to do a whole podcast on this guy, but I don't have time. You know, the Bible says in the book of Matthew, "Ye shall know them by their fruits." So what kind of fruits were Rick Perry, the most execution-happy governor in history, and Dr. Grigson, a psychiatrist who seemed almost gleeful about encouraging the state to end lives, actually serving up? Because from where I'm standing, it doesn't look like something I'd entertain eating politely. And while I think the revelation that Grigson diagnosed a defendant without ever speaking to him should have been more than enough to warrant a new trial, or at the very least a resentencing, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals upheld Willingham's conviction and sentence in 1995. So in 1996, Willingham appealed again, this time filing for state and federal habeas corpus relief, raising several issues: due process violations, evidentiary errors, and of course the old favorite, ineffective assistance of counsel. And after hearing some of defense attorney David Martin's repulsive comments about his own client, which we played last week, I've got to wonder if there isn't some legitimate weight to that last claim. However, what wasn't included in Willingham's habeas claim were any challenges to the validity of the fire science presented in court. And that's tragically understandable. In 1996, NFPA 921 was only a few years old, and its assertions were still being widely challenged. The tide of tradition and fire investigation took a long time to shift. In 1997, the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Texas denied Willingham's habeas petition. Then in 1998, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals affirmed their decision. Later that same year, Willingham petitioned the Supreme Court of the United States, but they declined to hear his case. With that, his standard appeals were officially exhausted. So when his attorneys called in Dr. Gerald Hurst, it wasn't strategy anymore. It was a last desperate move, one final attempt to save a life. Hurst worked at warp speed, drafting his report and faxing it to the governor's office just days before the execution was scheduled. In the documentary entitled Incendiary, he recalled that a staffer called him back to confirm that the governor had seen his report, but was declining to intervene. Think about that. An expert says, this is junk science and you're about to execute a man on disproven evidence. And the governor just lets it happen. All of this to protect his tough-on-crime persona. Class act, that Perry guy. The backlash from the public was immediate and scathing. The Chicago Tribune published a major story on the case, and suddenly Texas was in the national spotlight for all the wrong reasons. And that wasn't the only backlash Texas was facing. Around the same time, the state was still dealing with the fallout from another massive failure of its justice system. In early 2000s, a local TV investigation exposed major problems inside the Houston Police Department crime lab, specifically in its DNA and serology unit. Analysts there were accused of falsifying test reports, contaminating, or even mixing up DNA samples, and improperly storing critical evidence. The revelations brought a lot of unwanted attention to Texas's forensic practices, and when the lab was audited in 2003, it turned out the problems weren't limited to just one department. They were systemic. The entire DNA serology section was shut down. With that level of forensic mishandling, there was a real possibility that people were sitting in prison or even on death row because of fabricated, contaminated, or even misinterpreted evidence. Then the state executed Willingham the following year, and the already bad publicity got much worse. Because while some public figures might say any publicity is good publicity, that logic doesn't really apply to a crime lab whose findings can determine whether someone lives or dies. As a result of the Houston crime lab catastrophe, lawmakers were already working to pass a bill that would create the Texas Forensic Science Commission, a new oversight body meant to prevent this kind of forensic disaster from happening again. Pressure was mounting from across the country, and not just from scientists and legal experts, but from the public too. Then came the execution of Cameron Todd Willingham, a case that had already widely sparked outrage far beyond Texas's borders. And in the wake of that, the bill gained momentum fast, Suddenly, there was no denying that Texas had a serious problem on its hands. In 2005, the Texas Forensic Science Commission was officially formed. Its mission was to evaluate forensic evidence in cases that had already been adjudicated, to look for instances where outdated or erroneous science might have contributed to a conviction. In other words, their job was to identify cases where someone might have been found guilty based on forensic methods that modern science would no longer support. In 2006, the Innocence Project filed a formal complaint with the Texas Forensic Science Commission asking them to investigate the Willingham case. Their goal was to determine whether Dr. Gerald Hurst's findings were correct, that the original arson investigation was based on outdated and discredited methods, and to find out whether anyone involved in the prosecution had been negligent in presenting that evidence at trial. By 2009, the Texas Forensic Science Commission was finally prepared to review the Willingham case. But there was a problem. Governor Rick Perry was facing a tough re-election campaign, and the timing couldn't have been worse for him. The commission had just received a report from an independent fire expert, a man named Dr. Craig Byler. In that report, he tore apart the original arson investigation also. Byler's findings echoed what Dr. Gerald Hurst had said years earlier. There was no credible evidence of arson. In other words, Texas might have executed an innocent man. And that was not the headline a sitting governor wanted during an election year, especially a man that talked about punishment of criminals as upholding Christian values. After all, the commission was set to cast his inaction as something tantamount to unjustifiable murder. So just days before Byler was scheduled to present his findings to the commission, Perry took action. He suddenly fired the commission's chair and several other members. Officially, it was called a routine turnover. Unofficially, it looked a whole lot like damage control. Because if the commission went on record confirming that Willingham's execution was based on junk science, Perry's tough-on-crime persona, the same one he'd built his political brand on, might start to look more like tyranny. So instead of letting the investigation proceed, he stacked the deck. Perry replaced the commission's chair with a man named John Bradley, a district attorney known for being combative, political, and fiercely protective of the status quo. Within days of taking over, Bradley announced that the Willingham review would be delayed indefinitely. His reasoning? He said the commission needed to establish new rules and procedures before it could proceed with its work. It sounded bureaucratic. It was unnecessary. And if we're being honest, it was just a stall tactic. Months passed, and then a year, and still no hearing on the Willingham case. During that time, Bradley pushed the commission away from investigating old cases entirely, arguing that they didn't fall under its jurisdiction. It was an absurd assertion. Newer cases still had recourse through appeals. Older cases, that's where injustices could legally proceed. Reporters, scientists, and even lawmakers accused him of intentionally obstructing the investigation in order to protect Governor Perry during the election. And it worked. The election came and went, and the truth about Willingham and Rick Perry's inaction to save a man convicted based on junk science stayed largely buried. After Perry secured his re-election, the Texas Forensic Science Commission quietly resumed its review of the Willingham case. Dr. Craig Byler's report was at the center of it all. His findings were damning. The original investigators had relied on outdated fire patterns and assumptions that modern fire science had long since disproven, and the commission ultimately agreed. The evidence used to convict Cameron Todd Willingham did not meet modern scientific standards, but they stopped short of calling it misconduct. Instead, they labeled it flawed methodology, a reflection of the limits of the time, not intentional wrongdoing. And that's fair to a point. The investigators worked with what they believed was true, but once that truth was challenged, once the governor's office had Gerald Hurst's report in hand, that burden shifted. The only person who could have changed the outcome at that point was the governor himself, the one man who had the power to halt the execution and didn't. Yet the commission stopped short of assigning any blame to Perry or his administration for their inaction. So even as Texas acknowledged that the science was flawed, it left the moral question hanging in the air. Who should be accountable when the system kills someone on bad evidence? The investigator who didn't know, or the leader who did and looked away? In the aftermath of Willingham's review, the state faced an uncomfortable truth. The system had failed, and it had failed very publicly. But instead of expanding the commission's authority to prevent another tragedy, the opposite happened. Governor Perry's allies began working to limit what the Texas Forensic Science Commission could actually do. They pushed a narrow interpretation of the mandate, claiming that the commission only had jurisdiction over cases that occurred after its creation in 2005. On paper, it sounded like a technical clarification, but in reality, it was a shield. The commission was allowed to finish its review of the Willingham case, but that 2005 cutoff ensured it would be the first and last case of its kind. The TFSC could criticize the science, but not the people who ignored it. And it could never again look backward to hold anyone in power accountable. Once again, Texas managed to acknowledge that something went wrong, while quietly rewriting the rules to make sure it couldn't be questioned again. In the years that followed, lawmakers tried to patch the cracks in the system. Out of the fallout from the Willingham case and other wrongful convictions came something called the Texas Junk Science Law, a legal mechanism that was supposed to give defendants a second chance when their convictions were based on science that had been discredited or disproven. The idea was simple. If forensic evidence was used to convict you and it wouldn't hold up under modern standards, you would go back to court and ask for a new trial. On paper, it sounded like progress, but the reality was far more complicated. When the law first passed, judges were hesitant to apply it. Many argued that the evidence wasn't junk, it had just evolved. Others said the law didn't apply if the conviction had already been upheld on appeal.
It evolved like everything evolves into bullshit.
And so case after case stalled, including the one that would have proven whether the law actually worked. Robert Roberson. Roberson was convicted of killing his 2-year-old daughter Nikki Curtis after doctors concluded her injuries were consistent with shaken baby syndrome, a diagnosis that, much like the arson evidence in Willingham's case, has been widely discredited. But when Roberson tried to use the junk sciences law to challenge his conviction, the courts refused. They said the law didn't apply. So once again, Texas had a law that looked like justice and functioned like a loophole. Lawmakers eventually realized the Texas junk science law wasn't doing what it was meant to do, so they made changes, clarifying that the law applies when scientific understanding has changed or evidence once considered reliable has been discredited. In other words, they finally closed the loophole, and that amendment gave people like Robert Roberson another chance. His case was sent back to the courts to determine whether the outdated medical testimony that convicted him could be finally reconsidered. But years later, he's still waiting. The courts have yet to decide if he'll be granted a new trial. It's a haunting déjà vu. A man sentenced to die, waiting on a justice system that moves only when it's convenient. The law now recognizes that science evolves, but the system still struggles to evolve with it. Even years later, the fight to clear Cameron Todd Willingham's name wasn't over. In 2021, his family petitioned a Navarro County court for a posthumous declaration of innocence, hoping to prove officially what science had already made clear. But as the case gained attention, Willingham's ex-wife Stacy Kuykendall stepped forward, claiming that he had confessed to her before his execution, a claim she didn't make under oath, and one that conveniently appeared just as momentum was building for his exoneration. The court began to hear the case, and for a moment it looked like Texas might finally confront what it had done. Then, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals stepped in and issued a writ of prohibition, ordering the lower court to stop the proceedings. Their reasoning was simple. Once a man is dead, the courts can no longer rule on his guilt or innocence. And just like that, the trial that might have cleared his name ended. The state didn't prove him guilty again, it just refused to admit that it might have been wrong. The law is meant to be the framework of a moral society, a system that protects truth, fairness, and human life. But the law is only as moral as the people interpreting it. You can't legislate conscience. You can't write empathy into a statute. And no bill, no commission, no court opinion can function without someone willing to act when the truth becomes uncomfortable. Science moves forward, the law too often does not. In Texas, a man was executed based on discredited fire patterns and bad testimony. Years later, the state admitted the science was wrong, but not that the execution was. And today, another man, Robert Roberson, waits for the same system to decide whether discredited medical evidence deserves a second look before it kills again. I'm not here to say he's innocent. I'm here to ask why anyone would fight against certainty before carrying out a permanent and irreversible sentence. Who benefits from letting doubt die quietly? Because when we choose pride over truth, when we protect reputations over justice, that's when evil wins. And ye shall know them by their fruit. So look at our justice system. Look at who it favors. Not the innocent, but the ones with better attorneys and the most persuasive so-called experts. It does not reward truth. It rewards those who can twist the evidence into wins. Wins that often fuel political ambitions and pad people's resumes. And it doesn't seem to be learning from its mistakes. Yet it calls itself justice. Even so, every good tree bringeth forth good fruit, but a corrupt tree bringeth forth evil fruit. But we know them by their fruits. So I invite you to check the links in the show notes and sign the Innocent Project's petition supporting Robert Roberson's right to a new trial. Because whether you believe he's guilty or innocent, justice and truth demand that a man convicted on discredited science deserves a fair trial, and he has never gotten that. This has been Texas Justice on Crime to Burn. Oh, the dog. He's got the whistles.
You didn't see what you wrote?
Obviously I saw what I wrote. I wrote it.
I didn't know what to do with my hands.
My thoughts ran off without me. Or with me? I'm not sure. I ran off with them. They was running.
You were here and you weren't.
Yeah, I'm back now. I feel a sense of relief.
Did you finally get that gas passed?
Put a period at the end of that sentence.
So that's neat.
But if I eat right before we record, my stomach is featured heavily in the episode. So I thought, better to record hungry than to have to edit out stomach sounds.
Take the tyranny down one notch. This episode is brought to you by overly exuberant child warlords in training. They're loud sometimes. I just need Stevie Nicks in here to sing The Chain. Oh, hell no.
It's like a boomerang.
And he's like attached to you. Did you put a magnet on his face and on your shirt?
No. He wants praise for doing what he was told. He doesn't understand that he didn't do it long enough.
You're getting a demerit. There's no food under there. Stop. Because he raised around cats, I think. That's why he acts like that.
I gotta do the ritual licking of the junk.
Yeah, it does seem more ritual than practical sometimes, doesn't it?
I sure am glad that's not how we have to maintain our hygiene.
There's reasons to be thankful for less flexibility. But if your ass is getting funky every day, you could wash it every day. Your shirt is minty today, sir. You just gotta have more water. You don't want to die of the dehydration. Are we shooting water into space? Because that would be dumb. Not only are they incompetent, they get in your damn way when you try to solve the problem.
I like cheese.
I know you do. It's like my wiener, small but mighty.
So go do the thing. Push the buttons, leave 5 stars, and earn yourself the attorney.
Earn yourself an attorney. We're giving away free attorneys this week only.
Well, there's definitely wieners, because there's that truck that spilled sausage all over the highway. We did a little story on.
I'm going to lobby for boobs.
All right, we'll work on that.
What about nipples?
Don't send your nipples. He forgot that truth is also a basket.
A basketball. You can bounce it and hit it with a stick.
Glistening nipples. Everyone loves those. And it's sad that his Mylar balloon... Oh, nope, it's not sad.
Sorry, your recovery time was way speedier than I anticipated.
That the original arson Wait, did I just say all this? Yeah, I did.
Just harder to speak with your tongue and mouth parts.
He's scratching his butt on the couch. Our podcast is being held hostage by a dog with an itchy back. Go lay on your debris. Go lay in your debris field.
What do French people call it when they pound something flat? What if they make meat flat somewhere and they had a flat squirrel? Like someone just pressed it, man. It was like 2-dimensional squirrel. Some squirrel jerky. Squirrelky.
We should start a company that makes squirrel jerky and call it Squirky.
I'm going to argue hard for squirrelky now because it's fun to say.
Squirky is funner to say.
It sounds like something that happens accidentally in your underwear. Oh, you made me laugh so hard I had a little squirky. I'll let you imagine which end that comes out of, which side. Oh, don't muffle it. That's so adorable. Let all that cuteness come out into the world. The world needs it.
But like then you hear my dad sneeze, you can hear him from 3 counties away, you know.
See? And this is why women don't tell men what to do.
We lack the powerful sneeze.
Yeah, you don't have any bass in your sneeze at all. You're like a cartoon character. It's great.
I remember when I asked you which cartoon character or which comic book character you thought I most resembled, and you told me Deadpool's severed head from another dimension.
I just have weird game.
That's how you know we're soulmates.
Sure. If you're done being ridiculous, we can finish the show now.
Okay, I'm done.
Good jobby.
Thanks.
Everybody applaud.
Start giving them treats for closing it.
I was just going to say, I wonder how much more of the outside we can hear with that door open up. I was just going to ask you to do a sound check on it later. I was like, well, a lot more. There's a gunshot.
Well, when the neighbors are shooting.
The what's wrong with you? You listen to too much true crime.
Maybe. That's valid criticism. Do you like your new boom arm?
I love it. There's so much room for activities now.
On the dog's collar is... Who's shooting, buddy? Mountain ridges around here could be...
It's hard to tell what direction it's coming from.
The joys of living in the country.
He is a very vigilant animal.
He is. Especially when it comes to inspecting the Amazon trucks.
But they did sort of help train. I was trying to train him not to jump on cars and mess with people. And they kind of...
And they showed up with treats for him.
And let him in the truck. We're super sweet to him, and I think that's cool. But now if you come to my house, your car's getting scratched. So don't come over.
Yeah, don't come over. I once put a beanie hat over a cat's head when I was little.
That's how close a cat is to chaos. Always. It's one beanie hat away from complete chaos.
He was running backwards, like running. You would be shocked how fast a cat can run backwards.
The problem is, you should have put a hat on both ends, because once you put a hat on a cat, it can see right out of its own butthole.
It was my version of the Cat in the Hat, and it was just as much chaos as the book. But the cat did not clean up anything like the book cat did.
Well, my theory is if you put two hats on the cat,
right,
they'll just lay down like a chicken with some pressure on their back. You can't just cork one end of a cat and not expect it to go the other way. That couldn't hurt. It's kind of our thing. Woo! I might be a psychic. We sort of share a brain.
We do.
That's what you were trying to say.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I have the science and math side. You have the musical side.
I have the chaos side. This is a friendly reminder from your local Bureau of Existential Accountability. You will know them by their fruits. Not by their speeches. Not by their hashtags. Not by the number of times they use the word integrity in a press release. So if someone tells you they're tough on crime, but their orchard smells faintly of corruption and formaldehyde, that's not an apple tree, sweetheart. That's moral rot in a campaign suit. If their fruit is conveniently labeled forensic certainty, but tastes suspiciously like budget cuts and political favors, spit it out immediately. It's not organic. Okay. And for the love of my balls, wait. It got me. And for the love of whatever higher power And for the love of whatever higher power supervises this flaming carnival, stop letting people who plant lies call themselves gardeners of justice. Because justice doesn't grow in darkness, it grows in soil. Moderately acidic soil is well-drained, well-watered. Because justice doesn't just grow in darkness. It grows in truth, transparency, and occasionally the scorched soil left behind after someone finally says no more. This has been a public service announcement from Crime.When. Please inspect your fruit before consumption. Isn't consumption like an old medieval disease?
But vampirism, that one's...
We're going to have to shoot back. Sounds like freedom. I'm not even mad.
This episode of Crime.When is brought to you by our neighbor who decided that our Sunday recording window was the perfect time to pattern his shotgun. Thanks to him for providing an authentic soundscape of chaos. Thank you for understanding, because it's almost hunting season. And freedom.
Word, bitch.
This episode brought to you by Rural Sound Design and Winston's trauma responses. Winston only likes the sound of freedom when it's coming from our backyard.
Sounds different from far away, buddy.
It's okay, that's a shotgun. He's like, is this our new normal?
Yep. It's okay, bud. It's okay. Come here. A woman's feeding you full of anxieties. Come here. Let me give you a man scratch.
I want to go eat things and then shoot things. Then edit things.
In that order?
Eat, shoot, edit. They can't hear that.
No. They can hear that.
They can hear that.
May God have mercy on your souls.
Crime to Burn is a production of Crime to Burn, LLC, where we light fires in your brain and not your buildings. All rights reserved. Still spiritually parched after this episode? It's okay, Steve believes in cross-pollination. Here's a trailer for a show we think deserves to infiltrate your ear holes, in a good way. Don't forget to leave a 5-star review before you go. Steve is watching.
Welcome to Primetime Crime Podcast. I am your host, Kylie, and in this podcast, we are going to deep dive into some lesser-known unsolved true crime cases, from missing persons to unsolved homicides. This is the place where we are going to unpack it all, research it all, talk about it all, and try to bring justice to these families after all of these years. We are going to take it one story at a time, one case at a time, and hopefully justice will be ours. I hope you all will join me on this journey. You can find me at Primetime Crime, wherever you get your podcasts.